Welcome to Furious Fiction. I'm Jules Graham, and with me is Mark Mustian. And Mark, who are we talking to today?
We're talking to John Milliken Thompson. He's the author of The Reservoir. He's the author of Love and Lament. And John, welcome.
Thank you.
From Charlottesville, Virginia. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
With Love and Lament, John. Lament and lament and lament. What a sad story. What a sad story.
I didn't think it was that sad.
I did.
I thought it was good. I just like the whole historical part of it, and I guess both your novels have been kind of set almost in the same time frame, John, right? In this kind of the late 1800s where you don't really see a lot of novels set there. So, did you pick that for a particular reason or have an affinity for that? Or
I really got interested in it with my first book, The Reservoir. And it just happened to be set in this post-Civil War period, which, you're right, I mean, not a lot of people know about it. It's this kind of black hole of American history. And, it turns out it's really interesting. It's this transitional period sort of between the wars. Usually in school you study the Civil War, and then you kind of jump up to the First World War. And so what was going on in between? And turns out a lot of interesting things. It was the pre-modern world. And so, The Reservoir is based on a true crime case in Richmond, and that was a specific time. It was 1885. So I really wanted to sort of get the feel of that era and just live in it, as much as I could. And
well, your heroine, Mary Beth, in Love and Lament, all her siblings pass away, and she sort of seems to feel guilty that she's still a survivor. Were you determined to try and sort of make that contrast about what you do when you're faced with all this adversity?
Oh, sure, yeah. The story of Mary Beth, this is my second novel, Love and Lament. It's set in North Carolina, which is where my family is from. And it's inspired by a true story, and that's of my grandmother. And she grew up in a big family and lost almost all her family members by the time she was a young woman. And I just got really curious about that. And why she told stories, but not a whole lot about her early life. And so, it's just, I wanted to know kind of what that was like, especially in that era when if you got an infectious disease and there was no cure for it, and your body couldn't cure it, then that was it. You had 2 weeks maybe to say goodbye to your family. People lived with death. It was a very sort of close relationship that we don't have so much today.
Do you ever worry, John, we're writing about the history and the past? I remember reading somewhere where Charles Frazier, after Cold Mountain came out, somebody said, well, you referenced a Granny Smith apple, and they didn't come into being until 1940 or something. I mean, did you ever experience that or worry about stuff like that?
Sure. I mean, I worry about it every day. I'm writing another historical novel set in the post-Civil War period. This is closer to the Civil War. But I'm constantly checking things, and then after I've sent it off, I think of a whole lot of other things I should have checked. One thing did happen in The Reservoir, and I thought I had everything just perfect, and it turns out somebody caught me on the use of aspirin, which I had used a bad source, and it came in the 1890s as a patented medicine. And this was set in the 1880s, so I was off by a few years. But they had a sort of primitive form of aspirin, but more likely they would have used something like willow tea.
Was your grandmother around? Was your grandmother around to enjoy any of your book?
No, she died when I was in my 20s. But she did live a long life. She was the survivor, like you say, and I'm sure there was some survivor's guilt that she dealt with throughout her life. They didn't call it that back then. But she lived to be, I think, 99.
It puts a whole new complexion on it, knowing that it was your based on your grandmother.
Yeah, excuse me?
It puts a different light on it, knowing that this was based on your grandmother.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to do a whole big, introduction or afterward about that. If you go to my website, you can learn a little bit about that. I did a lot of sort of explanatory material with The Reservoir, and I thought that, because that was based on a real specific story, and this was just very loosely based on on some family memories, but mostly it was imagination because, like I say, she didn't talk a whole lot about those early years. So I was sort of imagining a person, not necessarily my grandmother, but the paradoxical thing is I felt like I got to know her better, at least the kinds of things that she had to struggle with in her life, and to really appreciate what an extraordinary woman she was for those times.
Well, John, thanks so much for being with us. Just real quick before we have to go, I mean, you told us you have another historical novel that you're working on. Anything more you can tell us about that?
Well, sure. This one is real different because it starts in 1868, and then there are flashbacks to 1865. But it starts in North Carolina and then takes off west, and it's a quest story. And I'm having just a tremendous amount of fun with it.
Well, thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll see you next time on Furious Fiction.
Okay, thank you very much.